Dad, can I have your gun? He's like, why? I was like, because our youth pastor is going to load it and put it in his mouth and pull the trigger. Rome, Egypt. What's happening? Sorry, I got a little fired up there at the end.
I was about to say that was a Destiny level rant. How do you not already have 100,000? Okay, let's do this. Let's do what kind of do you follow a particular denomination for Christianity?
No, never have. So here is my I desperately wanted to believe in God and was a Christian when I was a teenager. It was like 13 or 14, but I was non-denominational. So my family went to a church in a little town called Middle Run that had a preacher for a while that I thought sucked. And then I think that church is now defunct. For years, what that church was it didn't have a preacher. And so they opened it up to people that weren't preachers.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
Well, it actually wasn't bad in some senses. But anyways, here's what they do. You were a person that just felt deeply about a passage in the Bible and you wanted to talk to other people about it, you would come to our church. The church had probably 5 or 6 people is what we had. When I was about 14, I met a guy, it was sort of a happenstance thing, who was a youth pastor who was really big into professional wrestling. And this was at a time where like you had to pay money for the pay-per-views and stuff like that. And he had a lot of them probably illegally recorded on VHS. So he's like, hey, we're having this church thing. You want to come over? It's a pizza party. We'll watch like the new wrestling pay-per-view or whatever. So we went. He was a very cool guy. I enjoyed him. The church was Pentecostal. My youth pastor never dealt with any of the Pentecostal stuff, though. He was basically just like, look, being a Christian means following the word of Christ, try to be Christ-like, and that was basically, it's very surface level stuff. But as a 14-year-old, I was okay with that, right? He left, we got a new youth pastor, and they went all in on the Pentecostal shit. And that basically made me an atheist. Because I saw how insane this shit was, to the point where, like, some of my experience with it, for those that don't know, Pentecostals, like, talk in tongues.
Dude, it's wild. They'll bring rattlesnakes sometimes if they're crazy enough and bite them.
I'll get to, so, like, at one point, what happened was they brought in a faith healer. And so all these old people that are like on walkers are walking up to the front of the church, and this guy's just smacking the shit out of them while everyone screams in tongues. And I don't know how old I am, but my brother's 2 years younger than me. And they're like, we're all going to lay hands on you and pray for you in tongues. And I was like, no, I'm good. And they did it to my brother. My brother's screaming and crying. And I go up like with all these adults, be like, let me take him away. And they're like, you don't understand. And they're yelling at me. And the one lady
my
in the
brother
church
is crying.
The one lady in the church like comes up to me in a hallway and says, your problem is you're too smart for this. And that was the beginning of the end. Now my dad instilled a value in me that I think is very important, which is that if you benefit from an organization for something, then you try to stick it out there come hell or high water. So if you join a football team, even if you're not having fun, those people on that team are counting on you. You made a commitment. And with this church, we had this big fundraiser. We raised all this money in Ocean City, a big church event that was coming up. We were so excited. And I had got fed up with the church, and my dad said, if you go on that trip, if you allow them to spend money on you, then you're continuing to go to that church because you're not going to go get all this money and then say, see you later. So I went on the trip and then I got stuck at the church. The ultimate time where it ended, I'm not making this up. This is an absolute true story. I was asking questions about our youth pastor and he was talking and he started to talk about how he had the ability to handle snakes. And I said, that's crazy. As like a 14-year-old, I was like, that's crazy. And he looks me dead in the eyes and said, I could take a shotgun and I could load it, put it in my mouth and pull the trigger and God wouldn't leave it go off. And I said, I own a shotgun. It's only about 5 minutes away from here. Would you like me to go get it? He said, go ahead. So I went home and my dad was there. I was like, Dad, can I have your gun? He's like, why? I was like, because our youth pastor is going to load it and put it in his mouth and pull the trigger. And he says that God will prevent it. And my dad said, you don't have to go back to that church anymore. Dude. So that's how my time ended in that church. That is an honest to goodness story. That actually happened. It was, and for me, I became very jaded with Christianity then. Because I thought that's what Christianity was. And I was appalled by that. And so then I became very arrogant atheist. As I didn't think about it for a lot. I desperately needed to believe, but I didn't anymore. And then I would still go to church with my parents, but I just didn't really believe. It was more just a social gathering, etc. Ultimately, that was a large portion of my life, probably up until around the point that I met my wife. And ultimately, you started to see a little humility in yourself to understand that you don't know all the answers, that there's more important things out there, and ultimately seeing people not preaching to me, not telling me how to live my life, but people whose lives I thought were lives that I should model, that were good family people, that were raising children, that were good husbands or good wives, and understanding how they got there through Christianity is ultimately what brought me back to being a Christian. But I don't go to church. I haven't attended like a church service other than just my wife's family's Catholic. I've gone to a ceremony here and there with them, but ultimately I consider myself non-denominational then.
Okay, that's a wild story.
Yeah, it's true. That it was crazy. That church was absolutely insane. I'm obviously not going to say the name of the church or the people involved, but it was. Well,
I won't ask.
It really was like you could see the influence of ego, personality being more important than the message of God. Like you could see it in real time. And as an impressionable kid, they have no idea the damage they did to someone like me, because to me, being that was all I knew, that's what Christianity was to me. You know, and there were so many little things. And I had questions, right? I understand the concept of faith and how important faith is. But as a 14-year-old, I have questions. Like, here was a question that I got yelled at for asking. They told us that the act of getting angry itself is a sin. Not acting on the anger, but you hear something that makes you angry. You've sinned because you thought anger. I said, okay. But we agree that Christ never sinned, right? Correct.
Christ got angry multiple times.
Yeah. I was like, what about when he's flipping the money changers table? Isn't that him angry? And they said, well, no. And I said,
Christ wasn't angry.
I said, well,
it was righteous indignation.
Well, and they said, well, the reason that that's not a sin is because it was Christ. And I'm like, but so if you say, but then it's not a characteristic to be admirable. If you say if I were to say, my definition of sin includes the argument that Rob Noor could never sin, then I'm out there stealing and murdering and kicking people and all this shit. And I say, but I'm such a great guy, I've never sinned. And you say, yeah, look at all the sin. And I say, no, you forget, read the fine print. Sin can never include Rob Noor, so I've never sinned. You would say, okay, you could make that semantic argument, but why is that something to be applauded? It's just bullshit. It's a word trick. And I was like, surely there's more to Jesus than that. That it's just, sure, he did all the stupid shit that the rest of us do that's sin, but we just don't consider it sin. And now, of course, I know that no, that's an incorrect reading. Jesus didn't sin, right? And the idea that him having righteous anger at them for that wasn't a sin in itself. But these were people that weren't equipped to deal with these questions, so they would just tell me, like, shut up, don't think about this stuff.
I think if you can't answer those questions, you shouldn't be in a position where you...
I agree. Or if you are, because I do understand there are probably some churches that are desperate to have people, particularly working with kids and like youth groups and stuff like that. Maybe the best thing to say is like, that's a good question. Let me point you in the direction of someone that might be able to help you answer that. Instead of just being like, shut up, you're wrong. Right?
That's a major flaw Christianity has right now, is not wanting people to ask questions when you desperately need people to ask questions to affirm their faith.
I think that's the religious people that I look up them the most. I think they don't shy away from questions. In fact, they relish that, right? Because it's not like they're trying to sell you a bill of goods that they don't believe. They truly believe it. So they're happy to talk to you, and they're happy to answer questions. That doesn't mean that we're all humans, we're all fallible, but that's sort of where my initial. I should go to church more. I think we're going to start going to Catholic church more.